Hi, I'm Patricia Greenberg. Well, everybody's talking about getting older. It seems to be the number one topic of conversation wherever we go. But we're talking about what do we do to avoid it, or something that it's a disease or a problem. It's not sort of like matter of fact conversation. And anti-aging is a movement that erases the signs of aging. Members of the population cohort, that's the tail end of the baby boomers, like 55 to 60, are fighting really hard not to appear old. And at 62, I personally love that I'm aging. I love where I'm at in life, and I do my best, on a daily basis to just embrace it. Of course, there's things about it I don't like. I think that's the case for all of us. And I brought in my guest today, Kris Geerken, and she's with Changing the Narrative, Ending Ageism Together. So I want to open up the conversation about our own attitudes towards aging in order to change our collective perception about this wonderful stage of life that can and should be our best years. So instead of anti-aging, let's talk about anti-ageism. Welcome, Kris.
Thank you so much, Patricia. I'm so happy to be here with you.
So happy
And
to have you.
yeah, thank you. I loved how you opened it, talking about our tendency to avoid aging, which is pretty ironic because from the day we're born, we are getting older each day that we live, right?
And it
So,
should be reveled in. It's a blessing. It's a wonderful thing to be here.
right.
If I could put that in everybody's head. So
Yes.
tell us, what today we know the term, the isms. What is ageism?
Specifically, the definition of ageism is when we stereotype or have prejudice or discrimination towards someone based on their age. And much of this is seen when we make assumptions about ourselves or other individuals, or even toward a group based specifically on age. And a common narrative that we see, especially in the media, is about generations, when we hear boomers versus millennials, and that kind of pitting groups of people against each other based on their presumed generation that they're from. And that othering kind of language, this us versus them, is harmful to all of us, and it doesn't help. So we really should just steer away from that kind of languaging and wording. And a common thing that we see is it's directed toward younger people and older people, right? The lack of opportunities that may come to us based solely on age, and that's just not fair to anyone. And when we have these assumptions about people that maybe they're too young for this or too old for that, like a hairstyle or a job, right? Or maybe a relationship or some sort of task that you're performing, we're doing a disservice to people because we're not seeing them for who they are, what they're capable of, and allowing them to show up fully where they are at this stage in life, right? And ageism is everywhere. It's in all aspects of our society, and we just don't recognize it because it's so normalized. And when we have these negative messages about age showing up in, TV commercials, birthday cards, all of this, it's like counterproductive to our just living our best lives, right? And as we're aging, we absorb this negative messaging. Even if you've grown up in a household or community where age is revered, it's still in society. So you're going to come across it at some point in your life for sure, because that's just how it works in this society that we have. But because it's everywhere, we're absorbing these messages from the time we're about 3 years old in the society we live in. And when we have something happen to us as we're getting older, say we forget something, right? We then may just assume that that's just because we're getting older and just assign it to that. But we can all forget something at any age. So it's not solely because you're getting older that you're forgetting something. So this is important to be conscious of these things.
Kris, it feels like nowadays we're doing it to ourselves, right? I always, when I talk to anybody about, on this show, we talk about all things aging well, but we talk about everything related to it, whether it is nutrition, fitness, attitudes towards life, everything that has to do with living your life to the fullest at any age, right? So we shouldn't even have to add on at any age, right? That
Right.
shouldn't be part of the conversation, but we're finding ourselves forced to have to say that. Oh, you're in your 60s? Oh my goodness. It isn't just like I'm walking down the street and I ran into a neighbor. That person's in their 60s. That person's in their 70s. I can't believe at that age they're doing that.
Mhm.
So it has become this where, I'm in my 60s. And as a kid growing up, we didn't have to be told to be nice to older people. We didn't have to say, hey, maybe as a teenager, you might be a little snippy towards a grandparent, but nobody behaved anywhere near the level of ageism that we have now. And I find it's unfortunately coming from older and older people.
Oh,
It's not the kids. It's the older, it's the middle age, whatever that we're defining that as now, the cohort of people between 35 and say 55. Oh, they're old, or only old people do that, or I don't want to be in an old age home. So it's troublesome to me that people who are supposed to be fully formed adults are making these statements.
Yeah, well, that's definitely a concern. I see it out there as far as not in the media for sure, like of all ages, and especially on social media, you'll see younger people, talking negatively about older people and older, younger, but maybe the people that are in the middle, kind of middle age area, are kind of grappling with their own internalized ageism potentially, right? Of fears of not wanting to be part of the older group and become old in the way that society frames it in a negative way. So it maybe is some sort of rejection within themselves. And when you cut people down from somewhere, it's because you don't want to be that yourself, right? So maybe there's a correlation to that.
Yeah, it always stems from the insecurity.
Yes.
So you work with changing the narrative. Tell us about that. It's a very important things you're doing right now. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, we're doing a lot of work, that's for sure. So changing the narrative, we're a campaign of the Next 50 initiative to end ageism. And we do this through evidence-based strategies, strategic communications, and innovative public campaigns. And we are a leading effort in the US to change the way people think, talk, and act about aging and ageism. And our goal is ultimately to end ageism. We're striving to do that. And we know that it's going to take all of us, like from all ages, all backgrounds, all of us need to be participating in this, because it's not going to come from the top down. It has to come from the grassroots, the bottom up, and all of us need to become more conscious of what ageism looks like so we can change that narrative, right? So part of the work that we do, we have all these different campaigns. One of them is an anti-ageist birthday card campaign that we began that in 2020. And just earlier this year, we've launched our second round of cards where we commissioned artists from across the US to create age positive birthday cards, because we all know that when you go to the store, I would ask everyone watching this to go to the store and just pay attention to what the birthday cards look like, because they're dominantly negative, right? And we, at Changing the Narrative, just felt like we want to see more options for people, and age positive birthday cards. We just don't have enough of them. So that was
amazing, right? Because you go and you see at our age, you see it on the birthday card. At our age, we're no longer doing da da da, or the only way to get through life is with a drink in your hand, or it's you don't think about how negative it is, and the whole over the hill, and remember the tombstones
yes
on the front of the birthday cards when you hit 40.
Yes, big problem, right? And like we've had some people push back and say, oh, we love making humor out of that, we think it's funny, but at the same time, we have found through research that ageism, even if it's made into a joke, when it's directed at us and then it becomes the narrative of our society, it's hurting all of us in all kinds of ways. And I'll tell you more about that. But so anyway, we just need more positive messages about aging, because we just don't see enough of that. And then we also created our age-friendly workplace initiative. And there we offer employer education about the benefits of hiring older workers, and also the benefits of having intergenerational teams in workplaces. We just need to enhance that and really connect people of all ages in the workplace, and don't pit them against each other within the workplace, right? And we also offer workshops and resources for older job seekers as well. And just an interesting fact when it comes to workplace, AARP did a study and found that workplace age discrimination costs the US economy $850 billion annually.
Oh my goodness, that's astounding.
It's out of control, right? So we really need to be better at hiring older workers, promoting intergenerational teams and teamwork, and just make it better for everyone. And then we've also created our age-friendly healthcare campaign. And how that came about was when the pandemic first started, we were hearing it being labeled as a disease that was only impacting older people. And that was terrifying to us in the work that we do, because we're like, that's really dangerous. And then it led to people in positions of power in the US just terming it in different ways, of that older people should be willing to sacrifice themselves for younger people. And there was a lot of really dangerous language happening, and it just was all rooted in ageism. And so we created this campaign on what does ageism look like in healthcare, what's happening for people out there. And so in those workshops that we have and trainings, we have them for the public, for healthcare professionals, and for healthcare students, because we all need to start to recognize what ageism looks like in healthcare settings, because it's not good. We know
Kris,
that it
have you been able to infiltrate medical schools, teaching facilities, hospitals, where you can train not just the youngsters, but even the doctors my age are guilty of it? I know for sure when you're brought into an emergency room, I've had members of my family, seniors. My mother-in-law lived to be 103, and when we would take her, there wasn't an urgency to help her because of her age.
yes, yeah,
That's insane. And I don't know if that's written in a policy in a booklet somewhere, or they just make the assumption the person's 80, the person's 90.
it's
Someone in their 60s and 70s, they're a little more willing to help, but someone older than that, they're neglected.
right. And there's many aspects as to what the causes of that are, or why that happens, right? So just like if we weren't having such a difficult time with healthcare as it stands from the aftermath of the pandemic, right? We know how short-staffed healthcare is across the board everywhere. It's really in a difficult time. But say in a perfect world and everybody was doing well, there still is ageism in healthcare, and you've seen it firsthand, probably long before the pandemic occurred. And there's so many factors that play into it. We don't have enough geriatricians. Historically, we don't have enough people trained in the health of older adults. So there's that lack of knowledge. There is also just that ageist mindset that an older person is toward the end of their life, and that's not as valued in our society. And that's problematic for many reasons, right? So yeah, it definitely shows up, and it impacts our physical health, our mental health, and just why, because of that, it makes you fearful to even seek out healthcare.
Absolutely. That's what I was just going to say, that people are afraid to admit that. That's again that the ageism and then the self-ageism, that people are afraid to admit they don't feel well, or afraid to admit that they have difficulty walking. So that rather than reaching out and saying, could you take me to the doctor? I need a checkup. This is going on. They'll suffer in silence and actually could get worse. I'm very, very disturbed, Kris, when I read through your materials before we got on the air, about how people's, what's the word I'm looking for? I don't want to say complaint. Someone comes in with an ailment or a concern about their health, and they're not taken as seriously when they're older, or they're not taken with urgency, that a pain may be very severe in someone, but they're an old person, they're just complaining. That was so, so disturbing to me.
Yeah, and in all the workshops I've done, especially to the public, that's one of the most common statements I hear from people firsthand, that they have experienced this, right? To be just dismissed and treated as though it's either all in your head or it's not that big a deal, right? And that is, to me, it's terrifying, for myself as I'm aging, for the people that I care about that are older, it's not okay. And so we really want to help educate people in healthcare to recognize, what is ageist and what is not. How are we giving the best care that we can? Can we ask more questions? Is there time in the appointment time, which are shorter and shorter, right? Can we ask the questions that are needing to be asked? And so like a perfect example of that is with depression, right? There's a stereotype that as we get older people are depressed. It's normal to be depressed as we're older. That's a stereotype, and it's an ageist stereotype, right? And we know that depression is not a typical part of aging. So if someone has signs of depression, we really need to ask more questions and find out what's happening, because we just got to break down these stereotypes. There's lots of myths out there.
One thing that I always like to tell people, we could explore this at a later date as well. I think we could do a whole show on putting together how to prepare to go to the doctor, as you get older. But something that, because I took care of aging parents, and I took care of my aging mother-in-law, is to get write everything down you need to do and you need to ask before you get there. So
Yeah.
you're not scrambling when you get into the appointment. So that was one of the best pieces of advice I got. And I used it. Let's talk about what's going on with you before you get there. And please don't be embarrassed and please don't be afraid to share. And then I always like the line, the doctor's seen and heard it all. So anything you say, you're probably on the lower scale of severity, even if they're not, just to let them know to feel comfortable. So that's, something that we could talk about with older people is go prepared. That's really, really important. Because like you say, those short appointments, there's not much to get done in 15 minutes. And you're lucky if you get 15 minutes nowadays, right?
Very lucky. Yeah. And to also rank the priority of the things that you're bringing in,
Yes.
notes, right? Like what is your most important? If you only get one question to ask or one thing to state, put that at the top, and because that may be your only shot at getting something addressed that you really are concerned about.
Listen, it's not comfortable for anybody to sit in the waiting room for 2 hours and then go in there and then you get a 5-minute appointment. And there's always there's nothing we can do for you, or we have to send you to a specialist and you have to start that process all over again. So you have to, unfortunately, work very hard at being informed.
Yes.
Kris, we all have that stereotype of the older adult in our minds, like, that terrible image that somebody's frail, inactive, grumpy, not a productive member of society. What are you guys doing at Change the Narrative now to change that stereotype?
Well, everything we do is revolving around that and changing how we're thinking, right? And so it really starts with our own beliefs, which is a reflection of internalized ageism if we have negative age beliefs. And because they start when we're so young, we aren't always conscious of what those beliefs are. And over a lifetime, those become internalized truths and they're unconscious biases. And we just accept that, oh, that's just the way it is when you become older, right? And unless we begin to challenge those ageist stereotypes, such as older people are incompetent or don't want to use technology or that wrinkles are unattractive, those things cause us to feel shame, devalued, and really go in the opposite direction of us embracing the benefits of aging and really truly accepting where we are at this point in time in our lives. And internalized ageism is really the beginning steps of changing our own habits of thought. And it's really ultimately, it blinds us to the benefits of aging. It heightens our fears. Ageism is just making us grow older and more challenged as we're growing older. And it's just this like swimming upstream. It's really, really difficult in the society that we've created that's very ageist. And ultimately, we also know, well, we understand there's all these negative impacts. There are positive ways we can look at this. And research that comes from Dr. Becca Levy at the Yale School of Public Health. She's and her team have done extensive research on ageism, and they have found, which I think is really hopeful and so inspiring, that when we have positive beliefs about aging and age, it just leads to increased longevity. It can also increase our rates of recovery from illness and injury, and also helps us resist the, helps us cope with stress better as we're aging. So we have the ability to change our beliefs about age and aging, and they can be positive. We just need to see more of it in society.
That gets back to always looking for the positive, surrounding yourself with people that make you feel good about yourself. And, people argue with me about this. I always say, your peers are your best advisors. Try to find, doesn't have to be all the time, but find that group of people that you can relate to, that are around your age, you have the same memories, the same frame of reference. I call it the shorthand, among all of you without having to explain yourself. But it's also okay to have friends 20 years younger and 20 years older. And those of us in our 50s and 60s have that. We have people we know in their 30s, and we have people in their 70s and 80s and beyond that we can share our lives with. So it's very, very important. Kris Geerken, our guest, is with Changing the Narrative, and we're talking about ageism and how to make it go away, really, right? That's what we're trying to talk about here, Kris. Aging and ageism lingo. I want to just throw a few terms out because, again, when we did a little pre-interview, you were so fabulous in informing me why they're offensive. Senior, silver tsunami, geezer, grandpa, blue hairs. Remember the Geritol set? I don't know if anybody's using that term anymore. So what is now considered the appropriate way to address an older adult or to speak about them as a cohort?
Right. Well, in the work that we do at Changing the Narrative, we use the research that comes from the Frameworks Institute, who've done extensive research on aging and ageism and the languaging around it. And words are extremely important. We need to understand that to start, right? So they recommend from their research using the terms older adults, older people, elder or elders, and not elderly, because elderly has the connotation that someone is frail and needs all kinds of support and help. And so that's part of, like, especially in policy work, right? And legislation, we need to just use terms that are showing the independence that comes with us as we've aged many decades, that there's lots that shows that we can really, live our own lives. We don't need to be seen as infantile. So it's just about being more conscious of the language. And also, in addition to that, in the work that we do, we have all kinds of resources, but the images that are used. So if you have a website or a company, and the way that you're framing the visuals of older people, don't use stereotypical images of older people that are frail and weak and all of those things, because that's mostly what we see. So it's feeding the stereotypes and the ageism that exists. So think about the diversity and think of older people that of all ages, all different older people, and all the realities that exist within that and the diversity that exists within that, and represent that, not just a stereotype.
Yeah. Excellent advice. Now, it's known the benefits of being part of and absolutely engaged in a community has positive impacts on our overall well-being and quality of life. That sense of belonging is so important. I'd read recently that not only, like I mentioned earlier, is important to have a group of friends around your age, but you feel best about yourself when you're with people your own age that you've known for a very long time, childhood friends, certainly siblings, people that you really, again, you're not starting all over with, they have the same frame of reference about life with you. But often older adults stay away from their kids for fear of interfering or being a burden to them. And the irony in that is that the burden is worse when the families live apart from each other. And then there's, older people who are estranged from their family altogether or have no support in their life of people. How do we remedy this?
Yeah, it's a big problem in our society.
And it's growing. It's more and more. I'm hearing people
Yes.
alone, an 80-year-old woman alone in a house by herself with no kids nearby, no siblings left, and men as well. Very frightening.
Yeah, no, and it's a serious problem. As we all know, we're hearing more and more about this, which is good that we're starting to hear more. But what we do need is more intergenerational programs. That would be definitely a great remedy to bringing people together of all ages. But we all need to be a part of this change. And from our perspective, it really needs to be all of us to be participating in this. And one of the things that's been found is through research is that having intergenerational connections is one of the most effective ways toward reducing ageism. And so connecting with people and having meaningful conversations with all aged people and sharing interests and hobbies, that's one of the most crucial and important things that we can do as communities if you are far from loved ones and family members. So at Changing the Narrative, we have an intergenerational toolkit that's free to download from our website. So with that, you can use it and gather people together, in your neighborhood or wherever you live, of all ages, and have conversations that are structured. But bottom line, like, really, it kind of boils down to recognizing what you believe about aging and age. Are you open to connecting with people of all ages? Like, maybe just within yourself that you're resistant to doing that, but it would benefit you if you did, right? And just notice what behaviors and beliefs that you're carrying around. Question why you have the beliefs that you have. Did you buy into all of the stereotypes that we see in society so dominantly? And try to reframe what it is that you believe and start to notice the ageism that exists so that you can challenge it and think a more positive thought about it, and just look for people to connect with and wherever we are. And I know, it depends on where someone is living, but even if you have access to the computer, there's groups online now that are intergenerational. Those are definitely starting to crop up more and more, which I'm very excited to see.
Well, I have a couple of thoughts. When my daughter was little, they had a program in her school that they would visit. Those days we called it old age homes or senior centers. We're changing the narrative around that a little bit as well. But the kids would go and sing or perform, put on shows around the holidays, bring gifts. And I thought, is that a popular trend going on? Are you finding in your research that that is a happening thing, that that's working?
Yeah, there are still and probably more programs connecting schools with older adults and bringing them together to do creative things. I know of someone out in New York who has a program of older adults and connecting them with younger high school students and college students and do gardening together. Like
Wow.
they're out in nature and they're gardening and they're sharing that hobby, which is excellent. It's like bringing in nature and generations. Like it's a wonderful program. So things like that.
And I can't say enough about recruiting older adults to teach you how to knit, to teach you how to play cards. I A lot of people weren't thrilled about this, but like the movie The Intern, get an older person who's an accountant or a lawyer who might be retired. Retire is a word that just means that you stop doing something. It's not a blanket term for your entire life. So maybe you no longer work as a lawyer or an accountant or even a physician or a nurse or, like you say, a gardener, and they can come to schools and to different groups, after school programs, or even special interests. Like a lot of the universities have continuing ed or extension classes that you're not there to get a degree. You're just there to learn something interesting. There's so much room and so much potential for older adults to still be integrated, do what they love, and be around. It's helpful for the younger person to learn, and it's helpful for the older person to be engaged and to keep their mind sharp. I
Yeah,
can't say enough about those types of programs as well. I think the pandemic threw us off, that a lot of people are still, unfortunately, afraid to go to a group or afraid to go to a center. And I'm hoping we could encourage people to get out a little bit more with that, using safety protocols, to forward that as well. And you mentioned something also. Notice the ageism you see in society. Let's start paying attention across the board. When you see, like a safety, when you see something, say something. If you see an older person that's being bypassed in the supermarket and a younger person jumps right in front of them to get online, say something. I do.
great. Yeah.
I've seen that. There was I won't call it a parody. There was an episode on Grace and Frankie where they went in, because the character Grace, the Jane Fonda character, said, watch this, let's go in. And they went in to go buy something, and they're standing there, and a young, beautiful girl comes in, and the cashier just didn't even look at the two of them and started helping the girl. And she said, hey, I'm here. And she started screaming and pounding on this is a very prevalent problem. Stomach pain. Also in restaurants, that I didn't understand this, but I owned a restaurant. I've been in that business through my nutrition and food life, at one point. And it's that older people don't get as good service because there's a concern they're not going to be tipped well. The waiter feels they're not going to be tipped well by an older person because of a limited budget. And again, it's the age old thing that they're not nice, they're not hip, they're not aware. That coffee used to cost 25 cents when they were kids, so they're only going to tip a dime. Nothing could be further from the truth.
Right. And those are ageist stereotypes.
Exactly,
Right?
exactly.
Yeah.
So remember, it's everywhere, and
Mhm.
anytime, anywhere. If you see it, jump in, just like you would with any other time or place that you'd be wanting to help someone.
Right. And also think, hopefully we'll all grow to an older age, right? And how would we like to be treated? So also be mindful of that.
So, Kris, how do we get in touch and learn about some of the programs that Changing the Narrative does?
Oh, we have a website. Everything's on our website. So changing the narrative co.org is our website, and just connect with us through that. And we have an email you can connect and ask questions if you have questions, but all of our descriptions of our campaigns are on there, and lots of free resources for people to learn more about ageism, which I highly recommend, because we're all in this together, right? And we can definitely make it a better, more inclusive, age inclusive society.
Thank you so much, Kris Geerken, for coming on. It was such a pleasure to talk to you. And in closing, I want to ask, what do you like about getting older?
I really love the fact that I now have this broader perspective, the bigger picture. And when I was younger, I used to kind of think in this, it's it's only one way, or it's one way or the other way, right? I just used to think in a very linear way. And now I understand that there are so many dimensions to everything, all issues, and it's just given me, I think it's less stressful to know that there's a lot more to a story than just one way of looking at it. So I love that. And as I get older, I just see more and more of how complicated and complex life is in general. There's not a simple answer to it.
So here's an example of somebody who's more open with age rather than more closed with age, which is, again, one of those awful stereotypes.
Yeah.
So again, thank you. And Kris, I'll have you back because there's just so much more to talk about on the subject. And thank you all for listening to my show. Please subscribe on YouTube at Patricia Greenberg. And for more information about this show or for topics that you might be interested in hearing about, you can reach me at patriciagreenberg.com. So thank you all for listening.